For years, Rachel's home was silent, a place where grief lingered in every shadow. She didn't realize how much life was missing until one day it walked through her door in the form of a little girl and her German shepherd. Lila carried a fear no child should know, the fear of never being wanted. The dog at her side carried his own unspoken scars. Together, they were survivors. What unfolded in that small apartment was not a miracle of chance, but of choice. They chose each other. They chose to stay. And slowly, the empty rooms filled with laughter, footsteps, and the warmth of belonging. This is not just a story of a dog, a child, and a woman. It is proof that love can rebuild what life has broken, and that loyalty has the power to light up even the darkest home. The rain had been falling for so long that it no longer felt like weather. It felt like a punishment. Every drop struck Lila's skin like a reminder of how alone she was, how small she was in a world that kept rushing by without even noticing her. The water seeped through her sneakers hours ago. Now every step made a soft, miserable squish that echoed louder in her ears than the endless hiss of car tires across the slick pavement. She clutched Evan closer to her chest. His weight was hardly anything. He was only 4 months old. But in her thin arms, he felt like the heaviest thing she had ever carried. Not because of pounds and ounces, but because his tiny life depended on her. His fragile chest rose and fell against her soaked sweater, each shallow breath slicing into her heart with fear. What if the cold stole the air from him? What if she failed him, like the world had failed them both? She hunched her shoulders, as if the angle of her body could shield him from the storm. The blanket wrapped around him was already damp, edges dripping, but she kept pulling it tighter, desperate, whispering into his tiny ear, "Shh, Evan, I've got you. Just stay with me." Her voice trembled. Even to herself, it didn't sound convincing. Around her, life went on. Suits, umbrellas, high heels, hurried steps. 1,000 people, and not one stopped. She caught fragments of voices, the rise and fall of laughter under umbrellas, the bark of someone on a phone call, the distant siren. All of it moved past her, like she was invisible. Some glanced at her quickly and looked away, faces tightening, as if the sight of a drenched child with a baby in her arms was too inconvenient to acknowledge. Others crossed the street, unwilling to walk near her. Lila felt the sting of that avoidance more sharply than the cold. Her stomach twisted with hunger, the kind that gnawed at her quietly until she almost forgot what it was like to be full. But she knew she couldn't think of herself. Evan whimpered, a faint sound barely rising above the rain. She shifted him higher, trying to block the wind, kissing his cold forehead. His lips looked pale, and terror surged in her chest. She thought of the one bottle of formula in her backpack, her last hope. She had to save it, had to make it last. She had no idea when there would be more. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. She tried not to imagine her mother's face because, when she did, the ache was unbearable. But memory had a way of cutting through whether she wanted it or not. A laugh, the scent of lavender on warm skin, pancakes on Sunday morning. Her chest tightened, and she bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not now. The rain blurred the edges of the world until the sidewalks shimmered like mirrors. Streetlights reflected in long streaks across puddles. The city looked cold, metallic, like it had been drained of every bit of warmth it once held. For Lila, the storm wasn't just outside. It was inside her too. Clouds heavy with grief pressing down, lightning flashing in the fear of what would come next. She forced herself forward, one step, then another, her mind whispering the same mantra again and again. Don't stop. Don't let go. He needs you. But her body betrayed her. Her arms ached from holding Evan. Her back throbbed under the weight of the oversized backpack that sagged with bottles and diapers. Her fingers had gone numb, and she couldn't tell anymore if the wetness on her cheeks was rain or tears. She looked up at the faceless crowd. She wanted to scream, to shout at them, "See me! See us! Please, someone help!" But the words never left her lips. She swallowed them like she had swallowed every cry since the night her world collapsed. Instead, she lowered her eyes, kissed Evan again, and kept moving. The city thundered around her, indifferent. And in that storm, at that bus stop on 5th and Layton, a little girl's battle for survival had only just begun. The rain outside the bus stop blurred into a curtain of silver, but in Lila's mind, it was another sound that took over, the low, steady beep of hospital monitors. Even as water dripped from her hair, she could still smell the sharp tang of antiseptic, still see the endless stretch of white walls that felt like they could swallow a child whole. That day was burned into her memory, etched so deep it rose up every time she closed her eyes. She had been sitting in a stiff plastic chair with her small legs swinging, trying to be brave, trying not to cry, even though her throat ached with the need. She remembered the way nurses rushed past, shoes squeaking against the tile, their hushed voices bouncing off the walls. Words she didn't understand, words that made the air colder. And then, the doctor came. His face was kind, but too serious. His eyes carrying a weight Lila could already feel pressing against her chest. He knelt down in front of her, his white coat rustling as he spoke. There were complications. That was the word. Complications. Lila had never heard it before, but she could tell by the way his mouth tightened around it, by the way the nurse beside him looked away, that it wasn't a good word. She remembered clutching the chair's edge so hard her knuckles turned white, waiting for someone to explain. "Your mommy." His voice cracked, and for a second, he looked less like a doctor and more like a man who hated what he had to say. She didn't make it. The world tilted then. Sounds stretched, slowed. She could hear a baby crying down the hall, thin, wailing, insistent, but all she could feel was the sudden emptiness inside her. They let her into the room once it was quiet. Too quiet. Machines unplugged, curtains drawn halfway. Her mother lay still against white sheets, her skin pale but soft, lips curved in what could almost be mistaken for sleep. Lila climbed onto the chair beside the bed, her little hands reaching for the familiar warmth that wasn't there anymore. "Mommy," she whispered, waiting for the eyelids to flutter, for the hand to squeeze hers back. Nothing. She pressed her cheek against her mother's arm, her small body trembling, and for the first time, she let the sobs come, soundless and shaking, the kind of crying that left no air in her lungs. That was the day she first held Evan. A nurse placed him carefully in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket far too big for him. His face was scrunched, his cries so loud they pierced through the fog of her grief. "He's your baby brother," the nurse had said softly. "He needs you now." Lila stared down at him, hardly able to see through her tears. Evan's tiny fist curled around her finger with surprising strength. In that moment, a strange clarity cut through the chaos. Her mother was gone. Her father already a ghost in memory. And this fragile life was all that was left. She bent close, so near that her tears fell onto his blanket. "I'll take care of you," she whispered, voice hoarse but certain. "I promise. I won't let anyone hurt you. I'll be your family." The promise felt too big for her small body, but she wrapped it around herself like armor. She didn't know what bills were, or what it meant when adults whispered about guardians and custody. She didn't understand why some relatives looked at her with pity, while others looked at her with inconvenience. All she understood was that Evan was hers now, and she would not let him go. Those days in the hospital stretched like an endless blur. Relatives came and went, some patting her head, some arguing in corners. They talked about who would take the kids, as if she and Evan were items being passed along. No one asked her what she wanted. No one asked if she was ready to leave the only home she had ever known. At night, lying on a stiff cot beside Evan's crib, she would stare at the ceiling tiles and imagine her mother's voice. Sometimes she even whispered questions into the dark. What do I do now? How do I make him stop crying? How do I keep us together? The silence never answered, but she still asked. When the day came to leave, she walked out of the hospital with Evan in her arms, her backpack hanging loose on her shoulders. The nurse pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand, an address, her mother's handwriting at the top, smudged but still legible. "If you ever feel lost," the nurse said gently, "your mom wanted you to remember this place." Lila folded it carefully, hiding it in her pocket as if it were treasure. That scrap of paper became her compass, her secret map to something that felt like hope, but hope was fragile. As days passed in her cousin's cramped apartment, air thick with smoke, voices sharp with anger, she realized how alone she truly was. Still, every night, before she curled herself around Evan to keep him warm, she whispered the same words she had whispered in the hospital. "I'll protect you. I promise." Now, sitting at the bus stop in the storm, soaked through to the bone, the memory seared through her again, the sterile white halls, the too still hand of her mother, the wail of a newborn placed in her arms. The vow she made that day was the only thing keeping her standing. She looked down at Evan's pale face, his tiny lips parted in shallow sleep. Her arms tightened around him, trembling but determined. "I promised. I won't break it. Not now. Not ever." The rain kept falling, but inside, Lila held fast to that memory, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Even in the deepest loss, love could give her the strength to go on. The apartment never felt like a home. From the moment Lila and Evan were brought there, it seemed more like a place that pressed down on her chest, a space where the air itself carried shadows. The walls were stained with years of cigarette smoke, yellowed and curling at the corners. The curtains were heavy and drawn most of the time, keeping sunlight out as if joy itself wasn't welcome. The smell never left her nose: stale tobacco, burnt food, and something sour that clung to the couch cushions. It was a place where laughter had no room, where the sound of slammed doors and raised voices filled the nights instead. Her cousin, supposedly her guardian now, spent his days in a haze of beer cans and half-mumbled curses. He had a deep voice that always seemed too loud for the apartment's thin walls, and when he argued with his girlfriend, the shouting seemed to shake the floorboards. Sometimes Lila would cover Evan's ears when the yelling grew too sharp, whispering lullabies to drown out the poison in their words. It wasn't just the noise that scared her. It was the whispers, the late-night conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She'd creep out of her room to get water and freeze when she caught her cousin's voice low and urgent. The girlfriend's reply sharp like broken glass. The money. She left something for them. I know it. You can't touch it yet. She's the guardian on paper. She's 7. 7. She doesn't even know what it is. If I push, the bank will cave. That house too. The yellow one. It'll cover our debts. The yellow house. Even in whispers, those words cut deep. Lila clutched the glass of water tighter, her small fingers trembling. That was her mother's house. Her mother's laughter still lingered in those walls. To hear them talk about it like an object, like a thing to be sold, made something hot rise in her chest. But she stayed quiet, swallowing back tears, slipping back to her room before they saw her. In that tiny room, barely big enough for a cot and a crib, she laid Evan down and sat beside him in the dark. The glow of the street lamp through the cracked blinds fell across his face, soft and trusting. She stroked his cheek with the back of her finger and whispered, "They can't take it from us. Not in here." She tapped his tiny chest, then hers. "It's still ours. I'll keep it safe." But promises felt fragile in that place. By day, her cousin's demands were endless. She was small, but that didn't matter to him. Dishes piled high in the sink. Lila washed them until her hands pruned and the water scalded her skin. Floors sticky with spilled beer. She scrubbed until her arms ached. Laundry, cooking, even carrying heavy grocery bags up 2 flights of stairs while balancing Evan in one arm. He left it all to her. Once, she dragged a trash bag almost bigger than herself down the narrow stairwell, the weight pulling at her shoulders, the plastic scraping against each step. She slipped near the bottom, and the bag burst open, beer cans clattering across the landing. Her cousin's voice thundered down at her. "Clumsy! Can't you do anything right?" His girlfriend laughed behind him, high-pitched and cruel. Lila scrambled to gather the cans, her cheeks burning with shame, her hands shaking as she shoved them back into the torn bag. She never talked back. Not once. Not even when she wanted to scream. She knew better. Speaking up meant more yelling, more punishment, so she kept her silence, saving her words for Evan, saving her strength for him. At night, the apartment grew colder. The shouting would fade into muttered conversations or the drone of the television. That was when fear turned into resolve. Lila would lie awake on the cot, her hand resting on Evan's tiny stomach, feeling it rise and fall. Each breath of his anchored her, reminded her of why she endured. But sometimes the whispers crept in anyway. The words about the inheritance, the house, the money. She heard them plotting, her cousin's bitterness dripping into every syllable. Their dead weight, a burden. The girl can scrub dishes, sure, but the baby? Worthless. Once we get the deed, we can be rid of them. Those words dug into her like knives. She would curl tighter around Evan, covering his ears, as if her protection could shield him even from the poison of words. And in those moments, the promise she'd made in the hospital replayed in her head over and over, like a chant she refused to forget. "I'll protect you. I'll be your family. I'll keep you safe." The more she heard their whispers, the more she realized she couldn't stay. The apartment was not a home. It was a trap. Each chore, each slammed door, each cruel word pressed her deeper into the realization. If she didn't leave, they would lose everything. Not just the yellow house, not just the inheritance. They would lose themselves. One night, as she rocked Evan to sleep, she pressed her lips against his forehead and whispered, "We'll go back to the yellow house. That's where we belong. I'll take you there, I promise. The rain battered the windows. The smoke seeped under the crack of the door. But Lila closed her eyes and pictured sunlight, the sound of a wind chime, the scent of lavender drifting through a bright kitchen. She held onto that vision with all her might, and in that dim, suffocating apartment, filled with fear and greed, a plan began to grow in the heart of a 7-year-old girl who had already lost everything once. A plan to take her baby brother and find their way back to the only place that had ever felt like home. The apartment was finally quiet. For hours, it had been filled with the usual chaos. Her cousin's heavy footsteps pacing from the kitchen to the living room, the sharp clatter of bottles, the hiss of angry words exchanged with his girlfriend, until their voices blurred into background noise. But now, past midnight, silence had descended. The television, which usually roared until dawn, was dark. The only sounds were the muffled hum of a refrigerator and the occasional groan of pipes inside the walls. Lila lay on the cot beside Evan's crib, eyes wide open. Her body was still, but her mind raced, the way it always did when the apartment grew too quiet. Quiet here didn't mean safety. Quiet meant danger sleeping just beyond the thin wall. She knew how quickly quiet could break. Slammed doors, angry shouts, cruel laughter cutting through the dark. She turned her head toward the crib. Evan's small chest rose and fell with the rhythm of sleep, his breath faint but steady. His fists were curled near his face, as if even in dreams he braced himself against the world. Lila reached through the slats, brushing the back of her fingers along his cheek. Warm. Safe. For now. Her cousin's words from the night before still echoed in her ears. Dead weight. A burden. Once we get the deed, we can be rid of them. The memory made her throat tighten. Her stomach knotted. She had no time left. If she stayed, they would take everything her mother had left for them, and maybe even Evan himself. That was the night her plan solidified. It was fragile, desperate, but it was all she had. She would take Evan. She would go back to the yellow house, the only place that ever felt like home. Even if it was only a dream, even if she didn't know who lived there now, it was the one place her heart still trusted. Slowly, she slid out from under the thin blanket and knelt by the backpack she'd hidden beneath the cot. The zipper caught for a second, and she froze, ears straining. Nothing stirred. With trembling fingers, she pulled it open and began to pack. She reached first for the bottles she had washed and hidden away, lining them carefully inside the bag. Then the diapers, folded small, though they still seemed to take up so much space. She added the last bit of formula she had managed to save. Just enough for maybe a day or two. Not nearly enough, but more than nothing. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each sound calculated. She knew the walls here were thin. One creak of the floor, one misplaced clatter, and her cousin would wake. If he caught her. She didn't dare finish the thought. She slipped in a spare blanket, though it was rough and smelled faintly of smoke. Still, it might keep Evan warm. Her mother's paper with the address, their treasure, was already tucked in her pocket. Folded so many times the creases had begun to tear. She touched it through the fabric as if to reassure herself it was still there. When the bag was nearly full, she paused, listening again. The apartment seemed to breathe with her, the radiator hissing faintly in the corner, pipes ticking as they cooled. From behind the thin wall, her cousin's snores rattled through the air, uneven and harsh. His girlfriend murmured once in her sleep, and then went quiet again. Lila swallowed, her throat dry. This was her only chance. She tiptoed to the crib, and bent over Evan. He stirred, his tiny lips parting, a faint whimper bubbling from his throat. Panic flared in Lila's chest. She pressed a finger gently to his lips, whispering, "Shh, it's okay. It's just me." Her voice trembled, but the softness seemed to soothe him. His fists unclenched, and he shifted, sighing into sleep again. Very carefully, she slid her hands beneath him, lifting him into her arms. His warmth spread through her chest, anchoring her resolve. She tucked him close, pulling the blanket tighter around his small body, rocking slightly as she balanced his weight against her shoulder. "We have to go now, Evan," she whispered, barely audible. "We can't stay here. I'll keep you safe. I promise." Her cousin coughed suddenly from the other room. Lila froze, every muscle taut, heart pounding so hard she thought it might wake the entire building. The cough turned into a groan, then silence again. She waited a full minute, unmoving, until his snores returned, louder this time. Only then did she let herself breathe. She swung the backpack over one shoulder, adjusting the straps until the weight settled awkwardly against her back. The bottles clinked faintly inside, and she winced. No more mistakes, no more noise. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel in a dream. She inched toward the door, each step measured, her bare feet silent against the worn linoleum. The floor creaked once, and she stopped, breath caught in her throat. She waited, eyes darting toward the bedroom. No movement, no sound beyond the snores. Finally, she reached the front door. The metal lock felt colder than the rain outside, icy beneath her small fingers. Slowly, carefully, she turned it, holding her breath. The click sounded deafening in the silence, but still no one stirred. She opened the door just enough to slip through, then pulled it shut behind her, easing it closed until the latch caught. The hallway outside smelled of mildew and dust. A single light flickered at the far end, buzzing faintly. The building was asleep, but to Lila, every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. She clutched Evan tighter, his cheek pressed against her neck, his breath warm against her skin. They were free, for now, but freedom felt terrifying. Lila stood there in the hallway, her body trembling, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked down at Evan, kissed the top of his damp hair, and whispered again, "I've got you. Just hold on to me. We're going home." Then, taking a shaky breath, she adjusted the weight of the bag on her shoulder, shifted Evan in her arms, and stepped into the night. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly, the hallway, the apartment, the stale, smoke-filled air, all of it, was gone. In its place was the raw bite of night air, cold enough to steal her breath. Lila adjusted the blanket around Evan and stepped out into the street, her heart pounding so hard it felt like each beat would echo down the block. The city at night was not the same city she remembered holding her mother's hand in. Back then, the sidewalks had felt safe, even when crowded. Her mother's presence had been enough to turn every shadow into something harmless, every streetlight into a guiding star. Now the shadows stretched long and threatening, and the streetlights buzzed like tired eyes that might reveal her to the world. Her sneakers slapped softly against wet pavement, soaked from the rain that had barely let up. The clouds hung low, heavy, as if pressing down on the city itself. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, climbing and falling, disappearing into the night. Lila tightened her arms around Evan, whispering, "Shh, I've got you." His small body shifted against her, and she kissed the crown of his head, breathing in the faint, sweet scent of milk and baby skin, a scent that somehow cut through the cold. She knew where she was going, or at least she told herself she did. In her pocket, that folded scrap of paper with her mother's handwriting felt like a compass, even if the lines were blurred and half the ink washed away. She had memorized the address months ago, the way a drowning child might memorize the promise of shore. The directions weren't clear. Not anymore. She was working from memory. Memories of sitting in the back seat as her mother drove, of counting turns by how many songs played on the radio, of noticing the way sunlight slanted through the windows when they passed certain streets. Fragmented pieces of a map, stitched together in her 7-year-old mind. 1, 2, 3, she whispered, counting as she turned left at the first corner. The street was quiet, lined with darkened shops whose windows reflected her small figure back at her, a girl too small to carry so much. She pressed forward. Each block brought new doubt. Was this the right way? Had she miscounted? Panic threatened to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had to believe. If she didn't, everything would fall apart before it even began. The night stretched toward dawn. Slowly, the sky began to pale at the edges, bruised purple, softening into gray. The first traces of morning crept between the buildings, painting the world in cold light. Lila's breath puffed white in the air. Evan stirred, a faint whimper slipping from his lips. She stopped under a flickering street lamp, adjusting the blanket around him, rubbing his back gently. "It's okay, Evan. Just a little longer. We're getting close. I promise." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she forced herself to keep going. The streets grew less familiar with each step. The further she walked, the more foreign everything became. Buildings towered over her, some with broken windows, others with doors chained shut. A stray cat darted across the road, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the bag on her shoulder. Her heart raced as she pressed herself against a wall, waiting, listening. But no one came. No footsteps. Only the echo of her fear. She remembered her mother's voice, calm and certain, pointing out landmarks as they drove. "See that bakery, Lila? That means we're almost halfway." But the bakery was gone now, replaced by a boarded-up shop covered in graffiti. She swallowed hard and turned anyway, clinging to the memory more than the reality. The city seemed endless, each block stretching longer than the last. Her arms ached from carrying Evan. Her back burned under the weight of the backpack. She shifted him carefully, pressing him closer to her chest. He was so light, too light, and the thought twisted inside her. She couldn't let the cold steal more from him. By the time the sky had lightened into a washed-out gray, her legs felt like lead. The streets around her began to stir. Early risers, delivery trucks, the faint clatter of shopkeepers lifting metal gates. She ducked her head, hiding her face, moving quickly. She couldn't let anyone stop her. Couldn't risk questions she didn't know how to answer. Still, every corner brought doubt. Was it 3 turns left, and then 2 rights? Or 2 lefts, and then 3 rights? And the memories tangled, shifting with each step. She pressed her lips to Evan's head and whispered, "We'll find it. I know we will." And then, for a moment, hope flickered. She caught sight of something familiar at the end of the street. An old oak tree, its branches stretching wide, clinging stubbornly to life despite the city around it. She remembered that tree. She remembered pressing her face against the window as her mother slowed the car to turn, the sunlight dappling across her lap. Her heart leapt. She quickened her pace, nearly running now, her breath sharp and fast. Evan stirred again, but she hushed him, whispering, "We're close, we're close." The houses on this street looked different from the apartment blocks she had left behind. Smaller, older, with chipped paint and sagging porches. And there, just ahead, stood a house painted a faded yellow. The sight made her chest ache. The paint was peeling, the windows dull, but to her it glowed brighter than any palace. The yellow house. She stopped at the corner, clutching Evan tightly, tears stinging her eyes. She had found it. Against every doubt, every fear, her memory had carried her back. The wind brushed against her face, cold and sharp, but inside she felt warmth rise for the first time in months. "See, Evan," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "I told you. We made it." Her legs shook as she stepped forward, her heart hammering faster with every footfall. The porch loomed closer, the chipped steps, the faint outline of where the wind chime had once hung. She climbed slowly, her soaked shoes leaving faint prints on the wood. For just a moment, she let herself imagine it. The door opened to her mother's face, her laughter filling the air, the smell of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. She let herself believe, and then she raised her small hand and knocked. The faded yellow paint came into view like a dream half remembered. To anyone else, the house looked ordinary, even tired. A porch in need of repair, paint flaking under years of sun and rain, the faint outline of a wind chime long gone. But to Lila, it was everything. It was laughter drifting down the hallway, the warm smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, and her mother's arms lifting her high enough to touch the chime when the breeze made it sing. She slowed her steps, not because she was tired, but because her heart ached with anticipation. Each crack in the sidewalk felt like a beat in the rhythm of her memory. She remembered the way sunlight used to spill across the wooden floor inside, the lavender her mother tucked into small jars near the windowsill. She remembered falling asleep on the couch to the sound of her mother's humming. Evan still only a swelling in her mother's belly then, a future waiting to arrive. Now, Evan lay bundled in her arms, tiny and fragile, his breath warm against her neck. "We're here, Evan," she whispered, her voice trembling between exhaustion and hope. "We made it back." The porch creaked under her small, soaked sneakers as she climbed the 3 steps. The sound struck her like music, the kind of sound she used to hear when running to the door after playing in the yard. She paused, looking around, letting her eyes drink in every detail. Even without the wind chime, she swore she could hear its echo in the air. For a fleeting moment, she let herself imagine it. The door opening, her mother's smile breaking through, arms outstretched, lavender and pancakes wrapping around her like a blanket. The ache in her chest grew unbearable, but she clung to it, because it was the last place inside her heart that still felt alive. She raised her hand and knocked. The sound was small, almost apologetic, as if she was afraid to disturb the dream. She waited. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof. Evan stirred, letting out a tiny whimper, and she rocked him gently, whispering, "It's okay. They'll let us in. We'll be safe now." The door cracked. A man's face appeared in the dim light inside, middle-aged, hair graying at the temples, lines etched deep into his forehead. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in cruelty but in confusion. He looked at her, at the baby, then back again, as though he couldn't quite piece the image together. "Can I help you?" His voice was cautious, distant. Lila's throat tightened. She shifted Evan in her arms, gathering the courage to speak. I used to live here," she whispered. "This was our house, my mom's." The words felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. The man blinked, then glanced over his shoulder into the dim hallway behind him before turning back. "I'm sorry, kid. I bought this place from the bank a few weeks ago. They said the previous owner passed away, and the mortgage went into default." He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably, as though the weight of her small, drenched figure pressed against his conscience. "This isn't your home anymore." The words hit her harder than any shout, sharper than any insult. She felt them slice through her chest, leaving her hollow. Not her home anymore. The house that held every good memory, every piece of her mother's love, was gone. Sold off, like it was nothing but wood and paint. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Her throat closed. She wanted to scream, "No, it's ours. You're wrong. My mother laughed here. She tucked me in here. She died in this home." But her voice refused to come. The man gave her one more apologetic look. "I'm really sorry," he said, and then, with a slow shake of his head, he gently closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking was louder than thunder. Lila stood frozen on the porch, her arms tightening around Evan until he stirred in protest. Her vision blurred, rain mixing with tears until she couldn't tell which was which. The world tilted, the wood beneath her feet swaying like it might collapse. She turned slowly, staring out at the street. The yellow paint looked duller now, as if even the house itself was rejecting her. The porch that once held her laughter was only wood and nails to someone else. The windows that had framed her mother's smile now belonged to strangers. Something inside her cracked, wide open. She pressed her face into Evan's damp blanket, muffling the sob that broke free. It wasn't a loud cry. She had learned too well to keep her pain quiet. But it tore through her all the same. Her shoulders shook, her chest heaved, and the rain fell harder, as if the sky itself wanted to drown her sorrow. For the first time since she left the apartment, she felt the weight of despair so heavy it nearly forced her to her knees. There was nowhere to go now, no safe place left, no home. The yellow house, her mother's house, had been the last thread of hope she held, and it had been cut clean. She kissed Evan's forehead again and again, her lips trembling against his cold skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I thought this would save us. I thought—" Her words dissolved into silence. Evan whimpered softly, his small sound grounding her, even as the rest of her world collapsed. She couldn't fall apart. Not completely. Not while he depended on her arms to keep him warm, to keep him alive. But inside, the despair was a scream that would never end. She took a step back, her soaked sneakers slapping against the wood, each step heavier than the last. Down the porch, back into the street, away from the house that had once meant everything. The rain fell steady, cold, relentless, like 1,000 tiny reminders that dreams didn't always come back, that sometimes even memory betrayed you. Lila walked slowly, her head bowed, her tears falling silently. Behind her, the yellow house stood still, indifferent, a monument to a past she could never reclaim. And in her chest, despair exploded quietly, painfully, like a star burning out in the dark. The door had closed, but its echo still lingered. Lila didn't move. She stood on the porch as the rain poured down, seeping into her hair, her sleeves, her shoes, until she was soaked through and trembling. The world seemed to have gone silent, except for the steady drum of water on the roof above her. The man's words looped in her head like a cruel refrain. This isn't your home anymore. She tightened her hold on Evan. His weight felt heavier now, though he hadn't changed. It was the weight of failure, pressing on her small shoulders, dragging at her arms. She bent her head so her cheek rested against his damp blanket. He shifted slightly, letting out a soft whimper. She hushed him automatically, though her voice cracked and caught in her throat. Her body ached from exhaustion, but it was her heart that felt too heavy to carry. For weeks, maybe months, she had clung to the image of this yellow house as if it were a lifeboat. It had been the place she steered her memories toward when nights in her cousin's apartment grew too loud, too cruel. It had been the promise she whispered to Evan when he cried in the dark. We'll go back. We'll be safe. Now that promise lay shattered on the porch beneath her feet. Her knees wobbled, threatening to give way. She pressed her back against the door for support, but the wood felt cold, unfamiliar. Not hers anymore. Nothing here belonged to her. Not even the memories, it seemed, because the house itself had moved on without her. She thought of her mother, how she used to hum while cooking, the way she always smelled faintly of lavender, the warmth of her arms. For a moment, Lila wanted to close her eyes and let the rain take her, let the world dissolve so she could follow her mother into whatever place lay beyond. The thought frightened her, but it also soothed her, like the tempting pull of sleep after too many restless nights. Her inner voice wavered between surrender and survival. "What's the point?" the darker voice whispered. "There's nowhere left. No one is coming. You're 7 years old. How long can you keep this up?" But another voice, small but stubborn, rose against it. "He needs you. Look at him. If you give up, what happens to him?" She lowered her gaze to Evan's face. His skin was pale, but his lips parted with each shallow breath. Even in sleep, his tiny fist clutched the edge of the blanket. He had no idea the world had turned its back on them. He only knew her warmth, her heartbeat, her arms around him. Her throat burned. "If I give up, he'll have nothing. And I promised." The storm pressed on, and time blurred. She couldn't tell if she had been standing there for minutes or hours. Her legs began to ache, her fingers numb from clutching Evan so tightly. Cars passed on the street below, splashing through puddles, headlights cutting through the gray. A couple walked by with an umbrella, their laughter muffled by the rain. Neither of them glanced up at the porch. No one saw her. She thought of knocking again, of begging the man inside to let them stay, just for one night, just for shelter. But pride, or perhaps the sting of rejection, kept her still. He had already said no, his house, not hers. Another thought slithered in. What if I went back? Back to the apartment. Back to the shouting, the smoke, the whispers of betrayal. It wouldn't be safe, but at least it would be warm. At least there would be a roof. She pictured her cousin's face twisted in anger when he saw her at the door, Evan in her arms. The thought made her stomach twist. He would never forgive her for leaving. And worse, he would see how desperately she needed him, and he would use it against her. "No," she whispered aloud, surprising herself. Her voice was hoarse, almost lost in the rain. She shook her head, water dripping from her tangled hair. "We can't go back. Not there." The words anchored her. However hopeless forward seemed, backward was worse. She drew in a shaky breath and straightened, shifting Evan gently in her arms. Her legs trembled, but she forced them to hold. "It's just us now," she whispered to him, "and I'll find a way. I don't know how, but I will." The wind picked up, tugging at the hem of her damp sweater, whipping strands of wet hair into her eyes. The porch creaked beneath her as she stepped away from the door, down the steps, back into the storm. Each footfall felt heavier than the last, as though the world itself wanted to pin her there, to trap her in despair. But she kept moving. She reached the sidewalk and paused, looking back at the yellow house one last time. In the grey morning light, it seemed smaller than she remembered, quieter, just another house among many. Yet inside her, it remained sacred. Not because of the wood or paint, but because of what it had held. She touched Evan's cheek with trembling fingers and whispered, "We'll carry it with us. The laughter, the lavender, all of it. They can't take that." The rain slid down her face like tears she no longer had the strength to shed. For a moment, she let herself imagine her mother watching from somewhere unseen, standing at a window of light beyond the storm, whispering strength into her bones. The thought gave her just enough courage to turn away and face the endless streets ahead. She didn't know where they would go. She didn't know how far her legs could carry them, but she knew one thing with certainty. Surrender was not an option. Not while Evan still breathed softly against her chest. And so, in the pouring rain, Lila walked away from the porch where hope had died, her body numb, her heart fractured, but her will, fragile and flickering, still alive. The street stretched before her like a maze with no exit. Each turn seemed to lead to another block of faceless buildings, another row of windows with curtains drawn against the storm. The world felt unfamiliar, though she had walked some of these roads before. Without her mother's hand to guide her, every corner looked different, every shadow heavier. Rainwater streamed down gutters, overflowing onto sidewalks that glistened under the grey light of dawn. The city was beginning to stir now, delivery trucks rumbling, a lone bicyclist hunched against the rain, a woman tugging her dog quickly along the curb. None of them looked at her. To them, she was just part of the background, a blur of movement they didn't want to see. Lila walked slowly, her sneakers squishing with each step, her body weary beyond her years. Evan shifted in her arms, his whimper breaking through the hum of the waking city. She stopped under the narrow shelter of an awning, rocking him gently, trying to shield him from the wind. His tiny fists moved restlessly, his face pinched with discomfort. "Hush, hush," she whispered, her lips brushing his damp hair. "It's all right, Evan. I've got you." She bounced him gently, the way she'd seen her mother do, though her small arms trembled with the effort. His cries didn't stop. They rose higher, a thin, pained wail that made her chest ache. She closed her eyes, searching inside herself for something, anything, that might soothe him. And then, from the depths of memory, a melody surfaced. Her mother's voice, soft as night air, singing in the kitchen while stirring pancake batter. The lullaby wasn't complicated, just a handful of notes strung together, but it carried warmth like sunlight. Lila began to hum. Her voice was shaky at first, thin from exhaustion, but as she rocked Evan, it steadied. She remembered more of the tune, fragments of words her mother used to sing. "Sleep, my little one. The stars are keeping watch." The sound wrapped around them like a fragile cocoon, quieting the storm for a moment. Evan's wails softened, his tiny chest rising and falling in slower rhythm. His fist unclenched, his head nestling closer against her shoulder. Relief swept through Lila, though her throat tightened with the ache of remembering. Her mother used to sing that same lullaby when Lila was younger, when bad dreams woke her in the middle of the night. She would sit on the edge of the bed, stroking her hair, humming until the fear melted away. To sing it now, with Evan in her arms, was like borrowing her mother's strength for a few fragile minutes. She pressed her cheek to Evan's head and whispered between verses, "See? It's okay. Mommy sang this to me, and now I'm singing it to you. You're safe, Evan. You're safe with me." The rain pattered against the awning above, steady and unyielding. Around them, the city's movements quickened. Footsteps hurrying to work, buses roaring past, horns blaring impatiently. It all felt hostile, as though the world itself resented their presence. People stepped wide circles around her, glancing briefly at the bundle in her arms, then looking away as if they hadn't seen anything at all. She pulled the blanket tighter around Evan and stepped back into the open street. She had no destination now. The yellow house was gone, the apartment unsafe. All she could do was move, keep moving, as if forward motion itself might keep despair at bay. Her stomach growled, the hollow ache twisting deeper with every step. She thought of the last bit of formula tucked in her bag, but fear held her back from using it too soon. What if they needed it more later? What if this was the only bottle left for days? The decision weighed on her, heavy as the rain soaking through her clothes. The buildings blurred as she walked. Grey stone, red brick, facades of glass. She remembered fragments of her mother's voice pointing things out during drives. That cafe with the blue awning, Lila. That means we're almost there. But the cafe was gone, replaced by a boarded-up store. The city she remembered had slipped away like everything else. Her legs grew weaker with every block, each step harder than the last. She tried to distract herself by counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like she used to count the beats in her mother's lullabies. By 20, her breath was ragged. By 50, her arms burned from holding Evan. She shifted him carefully, switching sides, whispering encouragement as much to herself as to him. "We're okay. We just have to keep walking." But in truth, the city felt merciless. The streets were endless, the sky pressing low and unkind. Lila felt small, like a leaf swept along in a current too strong to fight. She glanced down at Evan, asleep again now, his breath soft against her neck. That fragile rhythm steadied her. For him, she would walk until her legs gave out. Her mind drifted back to the lullaby. She sang it again, softer this time, not to soothe Evan, but to keep her own fear from spilling over. The words tasted bittersweet on her tongue, reminding her of a home that no longer existed. But as long as she carried the song, as long as she carried Evan, some part of her mother remained. By the time she reached another corner, the sky had lightened into a dull gray, morning fully awake. She paused beneath a tree stripped bare of leaves, leaning against its trunk for support. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her arms shaking. She looked around at the unfamiliar streets, feeling the enormity of the city pressing in. There was no clear path forward, no map to follow, only more streets, more strangers, more rain. But surrender wasn't an option. She kissed Evan's forehead, her lips lingering against his cool skin, and whispered, "We'll keep going. I don't know where yet, but we'll keep going. I won't stop, Evan. Not while you need me." And with that, she pushed herself away from the tree, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and stepped once more into the unfriendly streets. Aimless, weary, but still moving. By the time she stumbled back to the corner of 5th and Layton, The rain had seeped into every part of her, down to the bone. The awning that hung crooked above the bus stop offered little shelter. Water dripped steadily from its edges, splashing onto the pavement in tired rhythm. Lila's sneakers squished as she shuffled forward, her legs trembling with each step. The bench sat empty, slick with rain, the metal cold and uninviting. But she had nothing left. Her knees buckled, and she lowered herself carefully, clutching Evan close. The chill from the bench shot straight through her thin clothes, but she didn't care. She had carried him for so long, and now every muscle in her body cried out for rest. Evan stirred, whimpering faintly against her chest. She adjusted the damp blanket around him, kissing his forehead with lips that shook from cold. His skin felt cooler now, and fear jolted through her, but she had no strength to do more than rock him gently. "I'm here," she whispered, though her voice broke in the middle. "I won't let go. I promise." Her promise sounded thinner than it ever had. Cars splashed past, headlights cutting through the rain, but no one slowed. Commuters rushed by with umbrellas, their faces hidden, their eyes averted. A man glanced at her, frowning, then turned away, quickening his pace. A woman murmured something to her companion, the two of them sharing a look before passing on. Lila's cheeks burned, though the cold rain quickly washed the heat away. She pulled Evan tighter against her, curling her small frame around him as though she could shield him from both the weather and the world's indifference. Her tears began to fall, first slowly, then all at once, mixing with the rain, until she could no longer tell them apart. The sobs tore out of her silently, her shoulders shaking, her throat tight. She had held them in for so long, through her cousin's cruelty, through the long walk to the yellow house, through the crushing rejection at the door. Now they poured out, raw and unrestrained, until her body felt hollow. She thought of her mother, of lavender and laughter and pancakes on Sunday mornings. She thought of the yellow paint, once bright, now fading. She thought of the man's voice saying, "This isn't your home anymore." The words echoed again and again, each time heavier, each time harder to bear. Why? She wanted to scream. Why us? Why Evan? But no one was listening. Not the strangers walking by. Not the rain. Not even the house she had once called home. Her tears slowed eventually, not because the pain had lessened, but because her body had run out of them. She sat slumped on the bench, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, her eyes stinging and swollen. She had nothing left to cry, nothing left to give. The world around her blurred. The streetlights glowed like halos through the rain, the wet pavement reflecting the grey morning sky. The city moved on without her, uncaring, relentless. Evan shifted again, a small sound breaking the silence between them. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't fully wake. She brushed a trembling finger across his cheek, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Sleep. Just sleep." She wasn't sure if she was saying it for him or for herself. Her mind drifted in and out, exhaustion pulling her under. She imagined what it might feel like to give up completely, to let the rain wash her away, to stop fighting the endless cold. The thought was tempting in its simplicity. No more fear, no more hunger, no more running, just rest. But then Evan's tiny hand twitched, grasping blindly until it found the edge of her sweater. His fingers curled into the fabric, clinging even in sleep. That small, desperate grip tethered her back to the world. He needed her, He only had her. She leaned her head back against the bus stop's glass wall, her hair plastered to her face, her body trembling with fatigue. Her eyelids drooped, but she forced herself to stay awake, to keep rocking Evan gently, even when her arms screamed in protest. The rain drummed on. Time became shapeless. People came and went, none of them stopping, none of them asking. The bench grew colder, harder beneath her. Still she sat, motionless, except for the soft sway of her arms. She thought again of her mother, the lullaby echoing faintly in her memory. She wanted to sing it, but her throat was too raw, her voice too broken. Instead, she hummed the barest trace of its melody, just enough to remind herself she still could. Tears no longer fell, but the ache in her chest remained, a hollow space filled only by the sound of rain and the weight of her brother in her arms. And so, on that empty bench at Fifth and Leighton, drenched and shivering, Lila sat on the brink of surrender. She had fought so hard, carried so much, but now, with no home, no direction, no strength left, she felt herself slipping closer to the edge. Still, even as despair pressed in on every side, she clung to Evan. He was her anchor, her reason, her last promise. And though the world passed her by, ignoring the soaked little girl and the baby in her arms, she refused to let go. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, softer but no less cold, when Lila first heard it. Not footsteps, not voices. Something sharper, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Claws clicking against wet pavement. She froze, her small body stiffening on the bench, her arms instinctively tightening around Evan. Her eyes darted across the street, scanning the blur of grey sidewalks and headlights streaking by. The sound came again. Closer this time. Her heart thudded against her ribs. For a moment, she imagined something terrible, a stray animal, hungry and wild. Her cousin had once hissed warnings about dogs on the street, how they'd bite without reason. Fear prickled across her skin as she pulled the blanket higher around Evan's face, trying to shield him from whatever approached. Then she saw it. Through the curtain of rain, a shape emerged. Large, powerful, its outline blurred by the misty air. Step by step, it came into focus until she could see the soaked fur clinging to its frame, dark and heavy, water dripping from its muzzle. A German shepherd. Lila's breath caught. Her body screamed run, though her legs had no strength left to carry her. She pressed back against the cold glass wall of the bus stop, clutching Evan so tightly he stirred in protest. Her eyes went wide, following the animal as it padded closer, its head held low, ears pricked forward. Every story she had overheard about dangerous dogs flooded her mind. She imagined sharp teeth, snarls in the dark. She imagined not being able to protect Evan. Her throat closed with panic, but no sound came out. And yet, something was different. The dog did not charge. He did not growl. His steps were slow, deliberate, each paw placed with quiet certainty. When he finally stopped a few feet from the bench, he lifted his head. His eyes, dark, intelligent, piercing, met hers. Not wild, not threatening, watchful. For a long moment time seemed to suspend itself. Rain pattered on the metal roof above, cars hissed by on slick asphalt, but none of it touched the stillness between the girl and the dog. Lila's breath trembled. Her arms ached from holding Evan so close, but she didn't loosen her grip. She whispered without realizing, "Please, don't." The shepherd tilted his head slightly, water dripping from his ears. His gaze never wavered. It was as though he was studying her, weighing her fear against something deeper. And then, slowly, he lowered himself onto his haunches, sitting squarely in front of her. His body was tall, proud even in the rain, but his stance was calm, solid. He did not move closer. He did not bark. He simply sat, like a sentry, like a silent promise. Lila's chest rose and fell in quick bursts, confusion battling with fear. No one had chosen to stop for her all day. No one had looked twice. Yet here was this dog, soaked and shivering, choosing to stay. Her lips trembled. She looked down at Evan, who whimpered softly in his sleep, then back at the animal. "Why are you here?" she whispered. The shepherd blinked once, slow and steady. Something in that simple gesture eased the tightness in her chest. He wasn't lunging, wasn't baring his teeth. He was just there, present, watching. Her fear didn't vanish completely, but it softened, thinned around the edges. She felt a warmth she hadn't expected, fragile but real, rising through the cold. Carefully, she shifted Evan, rocking him gently as she spoke in a trembling voice, meant as much for herself as for the dog. I don't have anyone else. It's just us now." Her throat burned with the words. "Are you going to hurt us?" The shepherd remained silent, unflinching, his eyes fixed on hers. And though he gave no answer, she felt something stir inside her, a sense she couldn't explain, as if his very presence was saying no. Minutes passed. Lila's body began to ease, her shoulders loosening slightly. She was still trembling, still drenched, but she wasn't entirely alone anymore. She leaned her head against the bus stop's glass, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "If you wanted to hurt us, you already would have," she murmured. "So, maybe you're here to help." Her voice cracked on the last word. The shepherd gave the faintest shift, straightening his posture, his ears flicking at the sound of her voice. He stayed seated, firm and unmoving, a sentinel in the storm, and though she couldn't understand why, Lila's heart whispered back, "You're safe. For now, you're safe." The shepherd didn't move. He sat as if carved from stone, rain dripping steadily from his fur, his chest rising and falling with quiet strength. His eyes, dark, unwavering, never left Lila's. They were not the eyes of a wild creature or a stray begging for scraps. They were steady, patient, and watchful, as if he had chosen this spot, chosen her. Lila shifted slightly on the bench, her arms aching from cradling Evan so tightly. She couldn't quite explain why, but the fear that had clenched her stomach moments before was loosening, replaced by something she had almost forgotten existed. A fragile sense of safety. The shepherd didn't threaten, didn't demand. He simply stayed. Evan stirred against her chest, a faint cry bubbling from his lips. She rocked him gently, murmuring nonsense words, her voice hoarse. When she glanced back up, the dog's gaze had flicked briefly to the baby, then returned to her, as if he was checking, assessing, understanding. That look unnerved her and soothed her all at once. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Why are you here?" The rain nearly drowned her words, but she knew he heard them. His ears twitched, his head tilting just slightly. Her throat tightened, and before she could stop herself, the question slipped out. The one that had been pressing in on her chest ever since the door of the yellow house had closed. "Are you lonely too?" The moment hung between them. The shepherd blinked slowly, his gaze softening. He didn't move closer, but something in his stillness carried the weight of an answer. Lila felt her chest ache in recognition. She thought of nights in her cousin's apartment when she curled around Evan, pretending not to hear the whispers of betrayal. She thought of walking aimlessly through the rain, her mother's lullabies the only thread tying her to hope. Alone, always alone. And yet here was this dog, soaked, silent, steadfast, choosing to sit in the rain with her. Choosing not to leave. Her lips trembled. Tears she thought she had run out of threatened to rise again. But they weren't the same kind of tears as before. These weren't sharp with despair. They were heavy with the relief of not being invisible. For once, someone had noticed. For once, she wasn't entirely abandoned. Evan shifted again, making a small, restless sound. She adjusted the blanket and bent her head close to him. "Shh, I know," she whispered. "It's hard, but we'll be okay. We have to be." The words cracked as she said them, but then her gaze lifted to the shepherd once more. His eyes met hers with quiet certainty, and for a fleeting second, she believed what she had just said. The rain slowed further, falling in a thin veil, soft enough that she could hear the faint sounds of the city awakening. Doors opening, footsteps splashing through puddles, the distant rumble of buses. People passed, glancing briefly at her and the baby, but no one stopped. No one ever stopped. No one except him. Her small hand, trembling, shifted just slightly away from the blanket, as if testing whether she might reach out. But she didn't dare. The shepherd remained still, regal in his silence, not demanding touch or closeness. His presence alone was enough. "You don't have anyone either, do you?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the drizzle, but her words carried weight. "That's why you're here. You know what it feels like." The shepherd exhaled, a slow, steady sound, almost like a sigh. His ears flicked back for an instant, then forward again. And in that small motion, Lila felt something click inside her heart. It was as though their loneliness had recognized each other, like two quiet souls meeting in the wreckage of the world. She leaned her head back against the bus stop's glass wall, exhaustion settling into her bones. Her body was trembling, her clothes soaked, but she no longer felt as though the rain was trying to drown her. Not entirely. There was a buffer now, a shield of sorts, sitting at her feet with eyes that promised vigilance. The world still felt hostile. The streets were still endless. The yellow house was still gone. But in the middle of all that loss, she had found something, someone, who chose to stay. She closed her eyes briefly, her cheek pressed against Evan's damp hair, and whispered, "Thank you." The words were fragile, uncertain, but they carried the deepest truth she had left to give. The shepherd shifted for the first time, lowering himself from a sit to a crouch, resting his chest against the ground. His front paws stretched forward, his head lifted high, eyes still trained on her. It was the posture of a guard, of a protector who would not abandon his post. And in that simple act, Lila felt the faint warmth of hope flicker to life inside her once more. The storm had softened to a mist, but the cold still clung to everything. Lila sat hunched on the bench, Evan curled against her chest, her small frame bent like a fragile branch under too much weight. She was certain she couldn't hold out much longer. Her arms burned, her eyelids sagged, her body begged for sleep. And yet, something kept her upright. The shepherd. He hadn't moved far since lowering himself to the ground, but his presence filled the space like a wall against the night. His broad frame blocked part of the sidewalk. His ears pricked at every passing sound. Each time a stranger drew too near, his head turned sharply, his eyes narrowing with quiet vigilance until the footsteps receded again. He didn't snarl. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to keep the world at bay. For the first time all night, Lila didn't feel invisible. She shifted slightly, pulling Evan's blanket higher, tucking it under his chin. His breath puffed shallowly against her neck, warm and steady. She kissed his damp hair and whispered, "We're okay." "He's here." Her eyes flicked toward the shepherd, and though she didn't know if he could understand, she added softly, "You're keeping us safe, aren't you?" The dog didn't move except to blink once, slow and deliberate, as though confirming what she already knew. Something in Lila's chest loosened. The tension that had coiled so tightly inside her since the yellow house door slammed shut began to ease. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and leaned her head back against the glass of the bus stop. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she allowed herself to believe she wasn't utterly alone. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy with exhaustion. Sleep pulled at her, tempting, dangerous. She knew she couldn't give in. What if her cousin found her? What if Evan woke crying and she wasn't there to soothe him? But her body betrayed her, rocking between wakefulness and the edge of surrender. Then she heard it, the faint shift of claws against pavement, the rustle of wet fur as the shepherd adjusted his position. She forced her eyes open, just enough to see him rise and step closer, his movements slow, careful. He lowered himself again, this time near the base of the bench, so close she could almost reach out and touch the curve of his back. His head lifted, eyes scanning the street, chest rising with calm, measured breaths. The sight steadied her. "You're not leaving, are you?" she murmured, her voice a thin thread. Her hand trembled as she reached out just a little, not to touch, but to shorten the distance between them. Her fingers hovered in the air, and for a moment she thought he might pull back. Instead, his ear twitched, and he stayed exactly where he was, a sentinel at her feet. The warmth that flickered in her chest wasn't physical. The cold still gnawed at her, but it was real. His presence was like a blanket wrapped around her mind, holding back the terror that threatened to drown her. With him here, she felt strong enough to keep her eyes open, strong enough to keep rocking Evan gently, even when her arms trembled. She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "I can do this. I can keep him safe. I'm not alone anymore." Her voice carried a fragile conviction, but conviction nonetheless. Minutes blurred into hours. The city shifted around them, traffic thickening, pedestrians hurrying past, umbrellas snapping open and shut. None of it touched the fragile bubble of stillness at the bus stop. There was only the girl, the baby, and the dog, an unlikely trio bound by something deeper than circumstance. At one point, Evan stirred again, a thin cry breaking through his sleep. Lila hushed him, her lullaby returning in a cracked whisper. The shepherd's ears perked at the sound, his gaze flicking briefly toward her before sweeping back to the street. It was as if he, too, understood the importance of that song, the way it held the frayed threads of her strength together. The longer he stayed, the more Lila believed in him. She began to imagine that maybe he wasn't here by accident. Maybe he had been looking for someone, just as she had been looking for a place to belong. The thought sent a warmth through her chest, stronger than any blanket could offer. She dared to whisper it aloud. Maybe you found us." The shepherd's head turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers with that same steady gaze. Something inside her shifted then, a small but undeniable spark of hope. It wasn't safe, not yet. She had no roof, no food beyond what little remained in her bag. The world was still vast and uncaring, but here, in the rain-soaked dawn, she had something she hadn't had in so long. A protector, a companion, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't forgotten. Her exhaustion pressed harder, but this time she fought it with more strength than before. She stayed awake, not out of fear, but because she had someone beside her now. She had to remain alert, had to prove worthy of the loyalty the shepherd offered without words. So she rocked Evan gently, her lullaby threading softly through the damp morning air, while Kaiser, the name she did not yet know, kept his silent vigil. And in that fragile moment, the bus stop became a shelter. Not of brick or wood, not of warmth or comfort, but of presence. His presence. It was enough to keep her going, enough to turn despair into endurance, enough to kindle the first fragile ember of hope. The dashboard clock glowed faintly in the muted dawn light. 6:12 a.m. Outside, Oak Ridge's streets gleamed under a relentless drizzle, every traffic light casting fractured reflections across slick pavement. The town still slept, its windows dim, its sidewalks bare. Officer Rachel Carter sat motionless in her patrol car, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had long since cooled. She lifted it anyway, took a sip, grimaced. The taste was bitter, metallic, and lukewarm. She swallowed all the same. It wasn't about the coffee. It hadn't been for years. It was a ritual, a habit that gave her hands something to do, a tether to a life she no longer felt connected to. Her uniform was crisp, her badge polished, every thread in place. But her eyes, once a sharp hazel, full of fire and stubborn conviction, looked dulled, coated in frost. She was here, patrolling the quiet arteries of a town she had sworn to protect. But her heart was frozen miles away, stuck at a highway intersection 2 winters ago. That was the night everything had collapsed. The rain, the headlights weaving like serpents, the screamed tears from her throat, unrecognizable as her own, metal crumpling, glass shattering. Blood in her mouth as she crawled through the wreckage toward the back seat. Her husband Daniel slumped forward in a silence that told her more than she could bear. Her daughter Emily's small car seat was crushed into twisted steel. The broken lullaby toy, a lamb that struggled through the tinny melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, haunting her long after the wreck was cleared. That sound had followed her for months, until even silence felt unbearable. Now, every morning, Rachel drove through Oak Ridge with that silence lodged inside her. Dispatch chatter filled the radio, but it was all routine. Noise complaints, domestic disputes, the small-town problems that rarely left scars. None of it ever touched the frozen ache in her chest. The wipers scraped against her windshield in a steady, metronomic rhythm. She adjusted the rearview mirror and glimpsed herself, a stranger. Hollow eyes, strands of hair loose from her bun, a jaw that no longer remembered how to smile. She used to laugh, loud, unrestrained, the kind of laugh that made her daughter giggle without knowing why. That woman was gone. Her fellow officers whispered behind her back. Carter doesn't flinch at anything. She's cold, like a machine. They thought it was tough. It wasn't. It was empty. Fearlessness came easy, when you'd already lost everything. She drove past places that should have meant something. The bakery where cinnamon rolls once thrilled her daughter. The elementary school where she'd promised to attend every recital. Each landmark was another silent reminder of the life that had been stripped from her. She passed them all without slowing, as if distance alone could bury the memories. The radio crackled suddenly. Unit 23. Routine check at Maple and 3rd. Report of a suspicious figure loitering near the old grocery. Rachel answered automatically, her voice even. Copy that. On my way. She set the receiver back, shifted into drive. Another call. Another piece of routine. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that could touch the frost coiled around her heart. But as she steered through the rain-slick streets, something stirred. Something she hadn't felt in years. Not warmth, not yet. Just the faintest ripple through the numbness, like a heartbeat inside a cavern of ice. She slowed at a red light, her gaze wandering toward the bus stop on the opposite corner. At first she thought it empty like always, a sagging bench left to rust in the rain. Then her breath caught. She leaned forward, wiped condensation from the windshield. 3 shapes huddled under the skeletal awning. A girl, 16, maybe younger, sat curled around a bundle. A baby, she realized, from the way the girl adjusted her grip, from the faint, restless motions beneath the blanket. Both soaked through, their hair plastered to pale faces. And beside them, so still he almost blended into shadow, sat a German shepherd. His fur was drenched, plastered to his frame, his head low but his eyes burned alive, storm-dark and unyielding. Rachel's chest tightened until it hurt. The sight pierced her like nothing had in years. Against her will, a memory surged. Her husband on the porch swing, cradling their baby girl, their old dog Daisy lying at his feet, ears flicking to neighborhood sounds. The picture-perfect moment she had once taken for granted. The wave of memory crashed over her, left her gasping. The girl at the bus stop rocked slightly, lips moving as if humming, maybe to calm the infant. Her face bore that hollow, exhausted look Rachel knew too well. The look of someone balanced on the razor's edge of giving up. And the dog. He didn't shift, didn't falter. He sat like a sentry, gaze fixed outward, guarding them against dangers only he could sense. Rachel's hand hovered near the radio. The protocol was clear. Call it in. A minor, an infant, an animal, exposed to rain in the dead of morning. Detachment was what the job demanded. But she didn't reach for the radio. She found herself slowing instead, easing the car closer until her headlights cut across the bench. The girl flinched, clutching the baby tighter. The shepherd rose in one smooth motion, ears erect, body curving toward them, protective as stone. His eyes locked on Rachel's car with warning fire. Rachel killed the siren lights, but left her beams illuminating the scene. The rain drummed harder on the roof. The baby whimpered against the blanket. The girl sat frozen in terror. And the shepherd, unmoving, unyielding, held his ground. Her heart thudded in her chest as recognition dawned, sudden and impossible. Kaiser. The name slipped from her lips, trembling. The shepherd's gaze flickered, his tail giving the faintest twitch, as though the sound of that name had cut through the storm. Rachel's breath stuttered. She blinked against the rain, but the image held. It was him. It had to be. Kaiser, the therapy dog once assigned to the department's outreach unit. The shepherd who had nudged traumatized children into speaking, who had lain beside veterans in therapy sessions, who had been a loyal shadow to Officer Daniel Reyes. And now he was here, soaked, scarred, guarding a girl and her baby, like the last sentinel between them and the world. Rachel stood frozen in the rain, her hand clenched around the doorframe, her heart hammering in her chest. For the first time in years, She felt something shatter in the silence she had built around herself. This was no routine patrol anymore. This was the beginning of something else. Daniel, her colleague, her friend. The man who had believed dogs could heal wounds no human hand could reach. The man whose funeral Rachel had attended just 2 years ago. His casket draped in the flag. His absence like another nail in the coffin of her faith. And Kaiser. Kaiser had disappeared after Daniel's death, gone without a trace. Rachel's throat closed. The sight before her blurred, not from the rain this time, but from the tears that gathered unbidden. Kaiser, she whispered again, softer, like a prayer. The dog didn't move closer, but his rigid stance shifted just slightly, a hesitation threading into the tension. His eyes, those dark, steady eyes, watched her with recognition buried deep in their depths. He remembered. Somehow, through loss and distance, he remembered. The girl glanced between them, her voice hoarse. You know him? Rachel nodded, unable to tear her gaze away from the shepherd. Yes, she breathed. I know him. He belonged to a friend of mine. Her voice cracked on the word, friend. The girl's arms tightened around the infant. He's been with us. He protected us. Kaiser gave a low sound. Not a growl, not a threat. More like a declaration, a quiet affirmation of loyalty. His chest heaved with the rhythm of his breath, and his ears swiveled toward Rachel as if he was weighing her intentions. Rachel crouched down slowly, lowering herself until she was closer to his eye level, her palms open in front of her. Every motion was deliberate, gentle. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, not from fear, but from the sheer flood of emotion surging through her veins. You're still the same, aren't you, boy? She whispered, her voice trembling. Still watching over someone who needs you, just like Daniel said you would. The girl's suspicious stare softened, if only by degrees. Rainwater streaked down her cheeks like transparent scars, mingling with the dirt of the street. She studied Rachel with an intensity beyond her years, as though trying to decide whether this stranger could be trusted. The baby stirred in her arms, a faint whimper cutting through the rain. Instantly, Kaiser turned his head, his body leaning closer to the bundle, protective instinct flooding his posture. Then he looked back at Rachel, and for one fragile second, the air between them was charged with shared recognition. Grief, loyalty, abandonment, hope. Rachel swallowed hard. The numbness she had carried like armor since the night her husband and daughter had died seemed to fracture piece by piece under the weight of this moment. She hadn't cried in months, hadn't allowed herself to feel. And now, kneeling in the rain, staring into the eyes of a dog she thought was lost, the tears spilled freely. You made it, she whispered, her voice breaking. You survived. Kaiser tilted his head, his gaze steady. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't step back either. And somehow, that stillness was more powerful than any embrace. It was recognition, silent and undeniable. Rachel stayed there, crouched in the rain until her knees ached and her uniform clung cold to her skin. She didn't care. All she felt was the pull of a thread that had been cut years ago, now miraculously tied again. The girl's voice trembled, almost lost in the downpour. Are you going to take him away from us? Rachel looked up, meeting the child's fearful gaze. For a moment, She saw herself reflected in those eyes. The desperation, the grief, the stubborn will to protect what little she had left. Her answer was quiet but firm. "No," she said. "Not unless he chooses to leave. He's with you for a reason." The girl's shoulders eased a fraction, and she glanced down at Kaiser, who remained between them, his form both barrier and bridge. Rachel extended one hand, not forcing, not demanding, just offering. The rain beat against her skin, dripping from her fingers. She waited. Kaiser didn't rush. He simply watched her, head lowered slightly, eyes unwavering. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he took a single step forward. Just one. Rachel's breath hitched, and a sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. It wasn't an embrace. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something quieter, something deeper. It was recognition of shared loss, of old bonds, of new beginnings not yet understood. And for the first time in years, Rachel felt the faintest flicker of warmth inside her chest, not enough to heal, but enough to remind her that healing might still be possible. The patrol car hummed quietly as it rolled through rain-slick streets, headlights cutting through the mist. Rachel's hands were steady on the wheel, though her chest carried a weight she hadn't named in years. The heater whirred, filling the cabin with a low drone that blurred into the rhythm of the wipers. In the back seat, Lila clutched her little brother as if he might vanish. Evan slept, head tucked under her chin, breath soft and steady. His skin was cool from the storm, but warming. Beside them, Kaiser curled close, damp fur carrying the scent of rain. To Lila, he was a wall, solid, dependable. His amber eyes flicked between her and Rachel, measuring trust. Rachel glanced into the mirror. What she saw made her throat tighten. A girl with hollow eyes, holding a child she was too young to protect, and a dog she hadn't seen in 2 years. Kaiser. She remembered him at the funeral, rigid by his handler's coffin, eyes fixed as if grief alone could bring the man back. After that, he disappeared. Now here he was, guarding 2 children, like it was the only duty left to him. "You're safe now," Rachel said softly. Lila pressed her cheek to Evan's damp hair. Her reply was barely a whisper. "People always say that. Safe. But it never really is." Rachel swallowed the ache in her throat, letting silence speak instead. Kaiser shifted, resting his head on Lila's knee. Tentatively, she brushed her fingers through his fur. The small gesture pierced Rachel deeper than words. "You know his name?" Rachel asked. Lila didn't answer, stroking Kaiser more firmly now. "He's Kaiser," Rachel continued. "He worked with a friend of mine. He stayed close to people who needed him." At his name, Kaiser's ears perked. Lila whispered, almost fiercely, "He stayed with us. He didn't leave." Rachel nodded. "That's who he is. He doesn't leave." The station drew nearer, but dread pooled in her stomach. Paperwork, questions, fluorescent lights, all the ways fragile trust could unravel. When she looked back, Lila's head had dropped against Kaiser, Evan asleep in her arms. It struck her as a picture of survival, a girl trying to hold the world together, leaning on a dog carrying grief of his own. By the time Rachel pulled into the station, the rain had softened to mist. Inside, the place was dim, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Lila froze at the threshold, clutching Evan. The room wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't safe either. Rachel didn't push. She shed her jacket, moving slowly. Kaiser padded past them, nails clicking on linoleum before he curled by the heater, sighing as if declaring the place secure. "You're soaked," Rachel said gently. "Let's get you warm." Lila didn't move, but when Evan whimpered, she cracked. Rachel fetched towels and a thick navy blanket, placing them on the desk without forcing them into the girl's hands. After a pause, Lila set Evan down, rubbed his hair briskly. His soft squeal almost sounded like laughter. For the first time, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. Rachel caught it, a flicker of humanity breaking through. She slipped to the break room, returned with a warmed bottle of milk. Setting it on the desk, she said, "It's just milk. You don't have to take it." Suspicion lingered in Lila's eyes, but at last she lifted the bottle to Evan's lips. He latched instantly, cheeks dimpling as he drank. Relief sagged her shoulders. Tears glistened, though she blinked them back. Rachel looked away, giving her privacy. Kaiser rose, padding closer. He didn't push. He simply curled near Evan's dangling feet, chin on paws. The baby giggled softly, toes brushing his fur. Kaiser stayed still, a quiet sentinel. Lila hesitated, then let it be. "His name's Kaiser," Rachel murmured. "He used to help kids who'd been through a lot. He knows when someone needs him." The girl's eyes darted to her, sharp. "Why would you help us?" Rachel's chest tightened with memories of the accident, the sterile hospital corridor, the hollow mornings after. She had drowned in loss for so long. Maybe here was a way to surface. "Because everyone deserves a little warmth," she answered. "Even if it's just a towel or a bottle of milk." Lila didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. Time stretched. The storm faded outside, leaving only the hum of the heater and the rhythm of Evan drinking. It wasn't trusted yet, but it was something. Then came the knock. The glass doors opened. 2 social workers entered, clipboards in hand, polite smiles, practice thin. A man with tired eyes, a woman in a navy cardigan. "Officer Carter?" the woman asked softly. "We're here for intake." Rachel straightened. Her chest caved at the sight of Lila clutching Evan tighter, Kaiser lifting his head with suspicion. "We're not going anywhere," Lila whispered, voice trembling. The woman crouched. "Sweetheart, you'll have a warm bed tonight. Food." "No." Lila's small hand pointed to Kaiser. "We're not leaving him." Kaiser growled low, steady. The man shifted uncomfortably. "We can't take animals into temporary care. The dog would go elsewhere." The words landed like a blade. Rachel saw the panic in Lila's eyes, the way she clung to her brother like someone tearing ground from under her feet. "No," Rachel said suddenly. The words snapped through the air. Both workers froze. Rachel steadied herself. "They're not going without him. Not tonight. Not while they're soaked, hungry, terrified. Not while they trust no one but that dog." The woman's voice was calm but firm. "Protocol requires immediate placement. The dog can't—" Rachel cut her off. "I'll take them." Silence. "Temporarily," Rachel pressed. "They need stability tonight, not another fracture." The man frowned. "That's highly irregular." "I lost my family once," Rachel said, her voice cracking but steady. "I know what it feels like when the ground disappears. I won't let that happen to them." The woman hesitated. "Officer Carter, are you certain?" Rachel nodded, jaw set. "I'm certain." She turned to the children, her voice gentler. "You'll come with me, just until things are figured out. You'll stay together, and so will he." Her eyes flicked toward Kaiser. His tail thumped once. Lila's mask faltered. A single tear slid down her cheek. "You promise?" Rachel crouched, leveling her gaze with the girl's. Her voice broke. "I promise." The clipboard man sighed in defeat. The woman scribbled a note about emergency exceptions. Rachel barely heard them. She only saw Lila's trembling nod, Evan's soft sigh, Kaiser pressing his muzzle against her knee. The decision had been made. Life had shifted. And for the first time in years, Rachel felt the numbness thaw. The rain still clung to their coats when Rachel unlocked the door to her apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint, a scent that always reminded her how long this place had stood silent. She pushed the door open, hinges creaking into a quiet that had, for years, felt like a mausoleum of memory. The apartment was modest. One bedroom, pale walls, only a few photos still hanging. Her parents, a certificate from the academy, and one picture she could never take down. Her and Daniel, smiling, Kaiser between them. That smile had been her undoing, the one she tried to remember without breaking. But tonight, ushering in a shivering girl with a baby and a drenched shepherd padding close, the apartment seemed to shift. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. "Here we are," Rachel whispered, almost afraid to disturb the moment. Lila hovered at the threshold, clutching Evan. Her eyes scanned the space as though expecting alarms. Evan stirred, but settled. Kaiser padded in, shook rain across the worn floor, and curled in like he owned the place. Rachel almost laughed, a sound the walls hadn't heard in years. "Sit wherever you like," she offered, motioning to the couch. It was Daniel's favorite spot, a place she hadn't touched since losing him. But when Lila sank into it, clutching her brother, it didn't feel like trespass. It felt right. Rachel busied herself in the kitchen, hands trembling. She made cocoa from an old tin, slid a steaming mug across the coffee table. "It's warm, no pressure." Lila eyed it suspiciously, but wrapped both hands around the mug, a tiny gesture of trust. Kaiser settled at her feet, his amber gaze steady. Rachel couldn't look at him without remembering the funeral, the way he sat by the coffin, as though grief alone could resurrect the man he'd loved. She thought she'd lost him forever. Yet, here he was, alive, guarding new lives. Rachel sat in the armchair, heart pounding. For years, this place had carried only silence. But now, Evan's soft breaths and Lila's guarded glances stirred something long dormant. The apartment itself seemed to exhale, shadows pulling back as warmth seeped in. "This place isn't much," Rachel said quietly. "But you're safe here, for as long as you need." Lila didn't answer. She only sipped the cocoa, shoulders easing just a fraction. Rachel draped a blanket around her. The girl flinched, then stilled. "Thank you," she murmured, voice so soft Rachel almost missed it. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the sound of someone unused to being cared for. Kaiser huffed contentedly, head dropping onto his paws as if declaring the watch shared. Rachel didn't press. She let silence cradle them, fragile but real. The days that followed were fragile, monumental in their own way. The apartment, once hollow, now pulsed with the quiet rhythms of living. Small footsteps, the murmur of a child's voice. Kaiser's claws tapping as he patrolled from room to room. Lila stayed guarded, her eyes sharp with suspicion, always keeping her bag packed under the bed. Gratitude came reluctantly, words clipped as though each one cost too much. but Evan bloomed instantly. When Rachel made grilled cheese one evening, he gasped, clapped tiny hands, and devoured it with glee. His laughter, high and unguarded, filled the room with something Rachel hadn't heard in years. Kaiser remained sentinel. At night, he stationed himself outside the children's door, ears pricked at every sound, glowing eyes a quiet reassurance. More than once, Rachel woke to see his silhouette guarding them, as if he'd taken an oath. Routines formed without planning. Towels folded neatly by the sink, milk stocked in the fridge, cinnamon stirred into warm cups at bedtime, the way Rachel's grandmother once did. Evan relaxed into these gestures, eyelids heavy, body softening against the couch. Lila resisted, sitting cross-legged by the window at night, as if expecting the world to take everything back. But slowly, she began listening to the bedtime stories Rachel told Evan, tales of stars, forests, and children who always found their way home. She never admitted it, but her gaze softened in the lamplight. Meals, baths, small kindnesses, they mattered. Rachel felt it in Evan's laughter and in the tiny, almost imperceptible easing of Lila's shoulders. The walls around her were still high, but cracks had begun to show. Rachel herself found comfort in the chaos. Crayons scattered across the coffee table, half-eaten sandwiches, Kaiser snoring against the rug. Proof that the apartment was alive again. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was living inside a mausoleum. One morning, the scent of pancakes and coffee filled the apartment. Sunlight slanted through the blinds in soft stripes. Rachel whisked batter at the counter, sleeves rolled up, muttering to herself. Kaiser sprawled near the table, eyes half closed. Evan swung his legs in a borrowed booster seat, humming happily, curls bouncing. Lila sat across from him, stiff as ever, but present. For Rachel, that was progress. Flour, eggs, milk. How hard can it be? Rachel muttered. Just before the bowl tipped, flinging batter down her shirt and splattering the floor. Silence fell. Rachel froze, cheeks flushing. Then Evan squealed with laughter, banging his fists. Again! Rachel laughed nervously. Not part of the act, buddy. She reached for a towel. From across the table came a sound. Small, fragile, almost disbelieving. Lila's lips twitched, and then she laughed. Short, unpolished, but real. Rachel's breath caught. She looked up as though witnessing a miracle. Lila slapped a hand over her mouth, trying to hide it, but the spark had already escaped. There it is, Rachel whispered, voice thick. I knew it was in there somewhere. Evans shouted gleefully, Lila laughed! Lila laughed! He clapped as though announcing a victory. For once, Lila didn't silence him. She let him celebrate. Rachel turned back to the mess, smiling softly. The air had shifted. A wall cracked. A sliver of light let through. She finished the pancakes, crooked circles sizzling in the pan. You know, she said casually, the best pancakes are always messy. Messy is good, Evan declared with the wisdom of a king. Lila almost smiled again. Almost. But Rachel saw it. The faint softening. The beginning of trust. When the pancakes were ready, Rachel slid plates in front of them. Evan drowned his stack in syrup. Lila gave hers only a cautious drizzle. Movements deliberate. Careful. Rachel didn't comment. She just sat, fork in hand, as the sound of forks and the hum of the heater filled the air. It wasn't much, but it was family. Fragile, uncertain, stitched together out of loss and rain. Rachel looked at Lila and saw it clearly now. Not just suspicion, but the faintest warmth lingering on her face. A ghost of laughter. A promise. The first sign of trouble came not with a knock, but with a phone call Rachel wasn't meant to hear. She had just come home, rain still clinging to her coat. Evan slept in a nest of blankets. Lila sketched silently at the coffee table. Kaiser stationed by the door like a sentry. The apartment, once hollow, now breathed with fragile life. Then the phone buzzed. Rachel answered absently, not checking the caller ID. A clipped voice cut through. "Yes, I'm calling to report a missing child. Lila Carter. She's my cousin. She hasn't been seen in weeks." Rachel froze, hand tightening around the receiver. She whispered, "I think you've got the wrong—" But the line went dead. Her gaze flew to the children. For a heartbeat, she thought they might vanish before her eyes. That night, she couldn't sleep. Kaiser lay at her feet, his steady breathing the only anchor. Rachel stared at the ceiling, remembering that first night in the precinct. 2 children huddled on a bench, a girl clutching her brother like rope in a storm. She remembered Evan's head against her shoulder as he drank warm milk, and Lila's fragile laugh when pancake batter slid down her sleeve. Those memories weren't hers to keep, she told herself, but they were hers to protect. The tension seeped into the days that followed. Lila sensed it first, watching Rachel with sharp suspicion. "What's wrong?" she demanded finally. Rachel brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." The lie tasted bitter. 3 days later, it broke open. Rachel had taken them to a small park wedged between buildings. Evan tottered on the slide. Kaiser stretched his legs. Rachel sat on a bench, scanning the street, trying to remember what relaxation felt like. That's when she noticed her. A woman in an expensive coat, leaning against the fence, eyes fixed on Lila. "Lila?" the woman called. The girl froze on the swing. "Lila Carter." "It's me, your cousin, Hannah." Rachel rose instantly, heart pounding, moving between them. "She's fine," she snapped. Hannah's gaze cut sharp. "She needs me." "Who even are you?" Lila slid off the swing, clutching Evan's hand, her face pale with dread. Rachel's throat locked. Hannah had the law on her side, the weight of blood. Rachel only had a small apartment, a shepherd, and the fragile trust of 2 children. Then Hannah pulled out her phone. "The authorities will want to hear about this." Back home, Rachel's hands shook as she locked the door. Lila sat stiff on the couch. Evan curled into Kaiser's fur. "She'll take us away, won't she?" Lila asked at last, voice cracking. Rachel knelt, heart aching. "I don't know what will happen. But you are not alone in this. Not anymore. If you want me to fight for you, I will." For the first time, Lila didn't look away. She gave the smallest nod. It was enough. That night, Rachel signed a form she'd once refused to touch. Temporary guardian application. She knew it would bring scrutiny, questions, paperwork. But she also knew one thing. She could not let go. The knock came 3 nights later. Sharp. Too sharp. They were eating dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, their new comfort. Evan swung his legs under the table, humming. Lila stayed quiet, but less guarded than before. Kaiser sprawled across the threshold, ears flicking at every sound. The knock made him rise instantly, a growl building in his chest. Rachel's spoon froze mid-air. Another pounding knock rattled the door. She cracked it open on the chain. A man stood there, stiff posture, eyes restless. Rachel recognized him from scraps of Lila's stories. "They're mine," he said flatly. "You have no right." Rachel braced the door. "That's not your decision to make." He shoved against it, chain straining. "I'm blood. I'll take them tonight if I have to." That was when Kaiser stepped forward. The shepherd planted himself between Rachel and the door, hackles rising. His growl rumbled through the hallway walls, primal and unyielding. The man faltered, bravado cracking under the dog's steady glare. "You're hiding behind a dog?" he sneered. "You'll lose them. Authorities are already involved." Something snapped inside Rachel. For weeks she had lived in balance, waiting for the system to decide. But looking at this man, with his cold entitlement, she felt the truth like fire. The children weren't property. They were lives in need of protection. "You had your chance," she said quietly, words cutting like glass. "You did nothing." The cousin's jaw clenched. He lunged again, and Kaiser's snarl erupted, louder, shaking the stairwell. Doors opened. Neighbors peered out, phones in hand. Someone shouted, "Police are on their way!" The cousin paled but spat as officers arrived. "This isn't over." Rachel stood in the doorway, heart hammering, Evan's small hand gripping hers. Lila pressed to Kaiser's side. When police led the cousin away, the apartment fell silent again. The children clung to her, breaths shallow. Kaiser pressed close, nudging Lila gently. Rachel knelt, pulling them both near. "You're safe," she whispered fiercely. "With me, you're safe." For the first time, Lila didn't pull away. She buried her face in Rachel's shoulder, sobbing silently. Evan clutched Kaiser's fur, holding on as though the shepherd's warmth was the only anchor. Rachel's own tears spilled freely, not from fear, but from the fierce certainty that she would not let go. Hours later, the apartment was quiet again. Evan slept, curled on the couch. Lila lay awake behind her door. Kaiser stretched across the threshold, a living sentinel. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, coffee cold in her hands. The cousin's voice still rang in her ears, but so did Kaiser's growl, a line drawn that no law could erase. She stared at the thin folder from social services. Court terms, custody forms, words that turned children into paperwork. If she didn't fight, their fate would be decided by strangers who had never seen Evan's sleepy smile or heard Lila's laugh. She pulled out her notebook. On the first blank page, she scrawled, "Guardianship Plan." The ink shook, but her resolve anchored it. She wrote, "Contact lawyer, meet a social worker, secure proof of stability, prepare Lila and Evan for questions." It wasn't neat, it wasn't certain, but it was hers. She looked toward the couch, at Evan's soft breathing, toward the closed bedroom door, where Lila's silence spoke of storms she'd survived. She whispered, "You deserve someone who won't walk away." For years, her apartment had been hollow, a mausoleum of grief. Now it held laughter, spilled pancake batter, tiny socks in the laundry, a shepherd sprawled like a guardian angel. It wasn't hollow anymore, and neither was she. Soft footsteps broke the silence. Lila appeared in the doorway, hair mussed, eyes wary. She saw the notebook, the bold heading. "Are you making plans?" she whispered. Rachel nodded. "For us." The girl's voice cracked. "He's coming back, isn't he?" "Maybe," Rachel admitted. "But if he does, I won't let him take you. Not you. Not Evan." Lila studied her, suspicion and hope warring. "You really mean that?" Rachel nodded again, throat tight. "With everything I have." Silence lingered. Then Lila gave the smallest of nods, fragile but real. When she padded back to bed, Rachel underlined 2 words in her notebook: permanent guardianship. For the first time, the idea didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. Kaiser shifted, lowering his head, a contented rumble in his chest. Rachel stroked his fur, whispering into the dim light, "We're going to be okay. I'll make sure of it." The kitchen table had never felt so much like a battlefield. Rachel sat at its edge, pen trembling between her fingers, golden streaks of late sunlight falling across a stack of papers that could change everything. Adoption application. The words glared at her from the top of the page, heavy with responsibility, shimmering with possibility. She glanced toward the living room, where Evan sprawled with Legos and Lila sketched silently on the rug, Kaiser stationed between them like a sentinel. They weren't just children in her care. They were hers already, in all the ways that mattered. She pressed the pen to paper. Name. Her name flowed out. Each box carried a memory. Evan's sleepy voice calling her in the night. Lila's reluctant laugh over spilled pancake batter. Kaiser's steady presence, anchoring them all. Describe your motivation for adopting. Rachel froze. Words felt too small. She wrote slowly. Because they belong here. Because I can give them what they've been denied. Because no child should wonder where home is. Tears blurred her vision. Kaiser padded closer, resting his chin on her knee. Families weren't always formed by blood. Sometimes they were formed by choice, by loyalty, by love. Another question cut deep. Are you prepared for the emotional challenges of adopting children with trauma? Prepared? No. No one ever was. She thought of Lila's brittle voice, insisting she didn't need anyone. Evan's panic at a slammed door. She wasn't prepared. She was simply willing. And maybe that was enough. She wrote, "Prepared isn't the word. But I will not walk away. I will fight for them every day." By the time she signed her name at the bottom, the room glowed amber. It was done. "What's that?" Lila's voice broke the silence. Rachel lifted the forms. "Something that might mean you and Evan don't have to leave." Lila's eyes flickered with mistrust, then softened. Evan bounded over, wide-eyed. "Really? We get to stay?" Rachel pulled him close, the papers pressed to her chest. "I don't know yet, but I'll try with everything I have, because you belong here." Over his shoulder, she saw Lila watching, hope and fear colliding in her gaze. For the first time, she didn't turn away. The waiting was the hardest part. The agency demanded everything: proof of income, references, medical clearances. Rachel complied, each form another brick in the fragile wall she was building. Then came silence. Days stretching like years, her future decided behind office doors by strangers who had never heard Lila hum or seen Evan fall asleep curled against Kaiser. Every morning, Rachel paced the porch, coffee cooling in her palms, eyes flicking to the mailbox. Kaiser lay at her feet, steady, ears twitching with each passing car. Inside, Lila began to change. At first, she remained ghost-like, her bag always packed under the bed. But slowly, something softer emerged. It happened in fragments. While folding laundry, Lila pressed a shirt to her face. "My mom's clothes used to smell like lavender. She grew rows of it. When the wind blew, the whole house smelled like summer." Rachel swallowed hard. That sounds beautiful. Lila nodded faintly. Sometimes I can still smell it in dreams. Another night, with rain tapping the windows, she whispered, "She made pancakes every Sunday. She'd hum while she cooked." Rachel asked gently, "Do you remember the song?" Lila hesitated, then hummed, a wavering lullaby that filled the dark room. Rachel blinked back tears. "Maybe one day you could teach me." "Maybe," Lila whispered. Each confession was a thread, fragile but real. One evening, Rachel found her on the porch swing, Kaiser's head on her lap, sunset painting her in gold. She carried out cocoa. Lila traced the rim of her mug, whispering, "Sometimes I think if I laugh too much, I'll forget her." Rachel touched her shoulder. "Sweetheart, laughter doesn't erase her. It keeps her close. Your mom would want you to carry her love into every happy moment." Lila's eyes shimmered. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." And for the first time, Lila leaned into Kaiser's fur, letting herself be anchored. The waiting dragged on, but the house filled with new sounds. Lila's quiet humming while drawing, Evan's delighted squeals, even shy bursts of laughter when Kaiser stole her socks. One night she appeared in the kitchen with a drawing. 3 figures, lavender stalks rising beside them. Rachel's throat tightened. "Is that us?" Lila nodded. "I thought, maybe this could be our garden." Rachel knelt, voice shaking. "Then we'll plant lavender in the spring, just like your mom's." The girl's eyes lit, and for a moment, she looked like a child who believed in tomorrow. Then came the knock. 3 firm raps on the door. Rachel froze, mug rattling in her hands. Kaiser was already on his feet, ears pricked. She opened the door to a courier, holding a plain envelope stamped with County Child Services. Her signature trembled across the receipt. When the door shut, silence roared in her ears. Lila appeared, barefoot, rubbing her eyes. Who was at the door? Rachel tried to steady her voice. "Just the mail." But Lila's gaze fell on the envelope. "Is that about me?" Rachel sank to the couch, the letter burning in her hands. Lila slid beside her, small hand curling into hers. Kaiser stood guard, eyes locked on the envelope. "Should we open it together?" Lila whispered. Rachel nodded, tears already blurring her vision. The seal tore with a sound that echoed like destiny. Her eyes scanned the page, desperate for certainty, then froze. "We are pleased to inform you. Approved as permanent guardian." Her breath broke. Tears spilled onto the letter, smudging the ink. She clutched it to her chest, sobbing. "Aunt Rachel?" Lila's voice wavered. Rachel pulled her into her arms. Hugging her so tightly the girl squeaked, then laughed through her own tears. "It's official," Rachel whispered. "You're mine. You're home." Lila pulled back, wide-eyed. "Forever." "Forever," Rachel said firmly. "No one can take you away." The child gave a cry, half laugh, half sob, and buried her face in Rachel's chest. Evan came running, wrapping small arms around them both. Kaiser pressed close, nudging Rachel's knee, sealing the vow in silence. The morning light seemed to brighten. Relief washed through Rachel, fierce and certain. No longer fragile hope, but anchored belonging. Lila lifted her head at last, cheeks wet, eyes shining. "Does this mean pancakes tonight?" Rachel laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "Sweetheart, I'll make you pancakes every night if you want." "Not every night," Lila giggled. "Just tonight, with lavender syrup. The way my mom used to make it." Rachel's breath caught, but this time it didn't hurt. She brushed a strand of hair from Lila's face. "Lavender pancakes it is." The letter lay on the table, no longer intimidating, but transformed into a promise fulfilled. Their future stretched before them, not as a question mark, but as a story waiting to be written. One of lavender gardens, laughter, Kaiser's steady presence, and the certainty of family. For the first time in years, Rachel exhaled fully. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. The Sunday sun rose gently over the neighborhood, spilling golden warmth into Rachel's modest kitchen. Butter hissed on the skillet, pancake batter sweet in the air. For the first time in years, Rachel felt not dread, but fullness. At the counter, Lila wore one of Rachel's old aprons, far too big, its straps wrapped twice around her waist. She giggled as she tried to flip a pancake, the spatula nearly as long as her arm. The batter folded into a messy lump. Instead of frowning, she burst into laughter, sunlight spilling from her voice. "You're getting better," Rachel said, steadying the pan. "Better than last week," Lila grinned. "This one almost looks like a circle." Behind them, Kaiser blocked the doorway, ears twitching at each clatter, eyes soft and golden as he watched. Every so often, when laughter rang out, his tail thumped the floor as though echoing approval. In his high chair, Evan gurgled happily, fists sticky with syrup from a torn pancake piece. When Rachel wiped his chin, he cooed and grabbed her finger with surprising strength. Her heart twisted in that tender, painful way love had of making itself known. It was nothing grand, just pancakes, cocoa warming in chipped mugs, a dog on guard. And yet, Rachel thought, wasn't this everything? They sat together. Lila poured too much syrup and licked it dramatically, making Rachel laugh harder than she had in years. Lila joined in, the kind of laugh that left them gasping, not from sorrow, but from relief, renewal, belonging. After breakfast, Lila sprawled with crayons on the rug, while Kaiser lowered his head near her hand. She leaned against him, absent-mindedly, whispering secrets he never answered, but always absorbed. Rachel stood in the doorway with coffee, watching without interrupting. Healing had its own rhythm. That evening, cocoa in hand, Rachel curled beside Lila on the couch. Evan dozed in his crib, his breath's tiny sighs. Kaiser sat sentinel by the door, ears pricked. The house was quiet, but not empty. Quiet like a hymn. For a long while they sat in silence. Rachel had learned not to rush. Silence here wasn't absence. It was gathering. Finally, Lila's voice broke through, fragile as glass. "I thought no one would ever want us." The words cracked the air, heavy with abandonment. Doors slammed, promises broken. Her shoulders hunched, bracing for rejection. Rachel's breath caught. She turned fully, letting the girl see her eyes that had known loss too. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing her fingers gently against Lila's. This time, the girl didn't pull away. "I thought—" Rachel hesitated, the words clawing out of her chest. "I thought I'd never be a mom again." The admission startled her. She had never said it aloud, not even to herself. But now, peeled bare. It felt less like a wound, and more like the beginning of healing. They sat bound in that fragile honesty, until Rachel took Lila's hand fully. "You and Evan, you're not just filling an empty house. You're filling my heart. I want you. Not because I pity you, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Lila blinked fast, a tear slipping down her cheek she didn't bother to hide. "You mean it?" "With everything in me." Rachel's voice cracked, but stayed steady. "You're mine, if you'll let me be yours." The girl leaned forward, resting her forehead against Rachel's shoulder. It wasn't a full embrace, not yet, but closer than ever. Rachel lowered her cheek onto the crown of Lila's head, breathing in lavender from her shampoo. "You're mine," Rachel repeated softly. Lila lifted her gaze, searching, as if looking for proof of dawn. At last, she nodded. "Okay." Thunder rolled in Rachel's chest. She pulled Lila into her arms fully, hugging fiercely, the kind of embrace that says, "I will never let go." For the first time, Lila clung back, anchoring herself. Tears spilled freely. Rachel's not of grief this time, but of joy, so raw it ached. Later, tucking Lila into bed, smoothing the blanket over her, Rachel turned to leave. From the dark came a whisper. "Good night, Mom." Rachel froze in the doorway, hand pressed to her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. She had thought she'd never hear that word again. But here it was. Simple, whole, remaking the world. The apartment had once been a mausoleum of silence. Each night, a cavern echoing with absence. Now it pulsed with life. In the living room, toys lay scattered across the rug. Photos Rachel had begun pinning to the wall captured Evan's gummy smile, Lila's shy grins, moments in the park with Kaiser standing watch. The house smelled faintly of cocoa, of crayons, of pancakes. Kaiser lay stretched across the hall, ears relaxed but always ready, his chest rising in the steady rhythm of guardianship. Rachel sat on the couch, exhaustion settling in, but the peaceful kind, the kind born of belonging. She looked toward the children's closed door, where dreams now bloomed without fear. Toward the box of finalized adoption papers on the counter, permanent, unshakable. Toward Kaiser, who lifted his head, checking on her, before laying it down again. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of laughter, of lavender memories, of trust, of the promise of tomorrow. Rachel whispered into the quiet. "We made it." Kaiser's tail thumped once against the floor, steady as a vow. If there had been a camera, it would have pulled back, past the worn rug, past the chipped mugs waiting by the sink, past the glowing window against the city's dark. Once, this place had been empty. Now it was full of voices, laughter, and the fierce devotion of a dog who had chosen them all. Rachel leaned into the silence, knowing it now carried a new name, home. Sometimes the greatest reminders of love don't come from people at all, but from the steady eyes and quiet devotion of a dog who never leaves our side. German shepherds especially have a way of teaching us about loyalty, courage, and the kind of unconditional connection we all long for. Stories like this one aren't just about survival or second chances. They're about how animals remind us to live softer, love deeper, and trust that family can be found in unexpected places. If you've ever wondered how to understand your own dog better, their moods, their signals, the little ways they try to speak, I came across a resource that felt like sitting down with someone who truly gets it. You don't have to check it out, but if your heart is tugging at the thought, it might be worth a look. At the end of the day, our dogs don't ask for much. A safe place, a kind word, someone to notice their silent devotion. And maybe that's the real gift. They remind us how simple and beautiful love can be.